He risked everything to save a paralyzed alien warrior. What happened next will shock you. The battlefield was quiet in the way only a finished massacre ever was. Brian Carter moved through the ruins with his plasma rifle shouldered and his helmet visor cracked down to minimum sensitivity. Burned metal, ionized air, and rot layered the atmosphere until even his suit filters struggled. Every step crunched. Shell casings, shattered mech plating, bone. He didn't look down. Looking down got people killed. His HUD was almost blank. Comms dead. IFF tags gone. The Drachnid assault had hit fast and hard, and the 23rd Marine Combat Division had folded with terrifying efficiency. Brian already knew what the silence meant. He was alone. Hell of a way to end a career, he muttered, adjusting the rifle strap as the power cell hummed against his shoulder. The sound steadied him. Machines still worked. That was something. His motion sensors spiked. Brian dropped instantly, knees bending as his augmented muscles absorbed the movement. Dust drifted. Smoke cleared. The figure ahead wasn't moving. Not Drachnid. Too smooth. Too wrong. She lay half-buried beneath collapsed alloy panels. Silver hair fanned across blackened stone like spilled mercury. Her skin was a muted lavender gray, faintly luminous even under ash. Larian, one of humanity's strongest allies, and according to official records, extinct in this sector. Brian's detector screamed. Not a warning tone, not a threat alert. A life sign alarm. That's not possible, he breathed. Her eyes fluttered open. Storm gray irises locked onto him with startling clarity. Human, she whispered, voice melodic despite the blood staining her armor. You're late. Brian kept his rifle raised, every instinct screaming trap, but his finger refused to tighten on the trigger. Name? Kira Banis, she said. 3rd Strike Force, I can't feel my legs. His med scanner confirmed it before he could stop himself from hoping otherwise. Spinal damage. Severe. Terminal in a hot zone. Protocol scrolled automatically across his HUD. Immobile casualty. Retreat conditions. Do not engage. She saw the hesitation. Leave me, Kira said softly. Others may still. Yeah. Brian cut in, kneeling beside her. That's not happening. Outside the ruins, something screeched. Too coordinated, too close. Brian looked at the dead city, then at the wounded alien who shouldn't exist, and realized the extinction report had been a lie, because if even one Larian had survived, someone had wanted them erased. Brian didn't give himself time to think. Thinking led to doubt, and doubt got people killed. He wedged his rifle against his shoulder, braced his boots, and hauled debris off Kira with controlled bursts of strength. She hissed once when metal shifted against her armor, then forced herself silent. You shouldn't, she said. Your command doctrine. My command's dead, Brian snapped, along with everyone who'd argue. He lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was. Lyrian combat armor looked ceremonial, but the materials were advanced, adaptive, stabilizing her injuries just enough to keep her alive. She locked an arm around his neck. You're making yourself a target. Been one my whole career. Plasma fire ripped through the smoke behind them. Brian ran. His enhanced muscles ate distance as Drachnid weapons scorched the ground at his heels. Kira pressed closer, her breath warm against his ear. Left now, she whispered. He didn't question it. He dove behind a collapsed mech as energy bolts slammed into its chassis. How did you? They hunt in triangles, she said. The visible units are bait. Right on cue, movement flared on his flank. Brian rolled out, fired once. The shot punched through a weak armor junction Kira had described seconds earlier. The Drachnid detonated, taking 2 others with it. Silence fell again. Brian exhaled slowly. Remind me to ask how you know that. When we survive. He checked his HUD. More bogies inbound. Too many. Ahead through the haze, a downed transport burned low and steady. Fuel cells intact. Emergency beacon faint but active. Kira felt it too. Medical bay, she murmured. Lyrian grade, if I'm not mistaken. Brian adjusted his grip. Then we're going shopping. She studied him as he moved. Most soldiers would have left me. Most soldiers didn't watch their whole unit die in 15 minutes. That wasn't the real reason, he knew it, so did she. You understand, Kira said quietly, that saving me will cost you more than your life. Brian smirked. Good, I was worried this day would be boring. The screech came again, closer this time. Kira tightened her hold. They've marked you. Brian broke into a sprint. Then let's make it worth their time. Because the moment he picked her up, the hunt stopped being random and became personal. The transport's doors were half melted, forcing Brian to shoulder them open with a grunt. Inside, blue emergency lighting bathed the interior in an eerie calm that felt completely wrong after the chaos outside. A heel pod stood untouched at the far end. Larian design, crystal interfaces active. Kira stared. By the first light, it survived. Brian lowered her beside it, keeping his rifle trained on the entrance. His med scanner chimed violently the moment she came within range. Genetic alerts stacked over each other until his HUD lagged. That's not just injury data, he muttered. You're lighting up every classification filter I have. Kira didn't deny it. I carry something. Yeah, Brian said. I figured that part out when extinction reports started lying. She met his eyes. The plague wasn't a weapon, it was a filter. Those who survived changed. The implications hit fast and hard. You're not a survivor, Brian said slowly. You're proof. Outside claws scraped metal. Kira nodded once. And that makes me valuable or dangerous depending who finds me first. Brian activated the pod. Will it heal your spine? Yes, a pause, but it will bind us. He glanced at her. Define bind. Our healing chambers create temporary biological alignment between patient and operator, she said carefully. Nervous systems, metabolism, genetic resonance. That sounds permanent. It often is. Brian laughed once, sharp and humorless. Of course it is. She searched his face. You still have time to leave. The transport shook as drachnids began forcing entry. Brian stepped toward the pod. I didn't drag you through hell to stop at the paperwork. Her breath caught, not fear, something else. You don't know what this will make you, Kira said. Brian met her gaze. I already know what I am if I walk away. He stepped inside the chamber with her as alarms screamed. Light began to build. Because the pod wasn't just going to heal her, it was about to rewrite them both. The healing chamber didn't ease them in. It slammed them together. Light flooded Brian's vision. Not blinding, but invasive. Like something digging through him instead of around him. His muscles locked as heat poured through his veins, sharp enough to hurt, smooth enough to feel intentional. Kira gasped. Not from pain, from recognition. Their nervous systems aligned first. Brian felt it instantly, the alien cadence of her heartbeat overlaying his own, faster, stronger. Sensations doubled, then braided. Every scrape of metal outside the pod vibrated through his bones. Every shift of her breath echoed inside his skull. This isn't, Kira choked. This is deeper than it should be. Of course it is, Brian growled through clenched teeth. Nothing today comes with instructions. Data flooded his HUD unprompted. Not his systems, hers. Target profiles, drachnid movement patterns, thermal overlays his suit had never been capable of producing. In return, he felt her awareness expand, learning human combat logic, weapon timing, kill probabilities. They weren't sharing information. They were sharing perspective. Outside the transport, metal screamed. The drachnids were inside. Kira, Brian said, steadying his breathing. Tell me this ends with you walking. It ends with me alive, she replied. Walking is likely. The pod pulsed. Something shifted. Brian felt it, his balance recalibrating, reflexes tightening, muscles responding before commands formed. At the same time, Kira's paralysis receded like a bad memory overwritten by new data. Her toes twitched. She sucked in a sharp breath. I can feel the floor. The pod cracked open as plasma fire tore through the transport's hull. Brian stepped out first, rifle up. Kira followed, unsteady then stronger with every step. Her movement synced to his without discussion. When he leaned left, she angled right. When he raised his weapon, she already knew where he'd fire. A drachnid burst through the smoke. Brian fired. Kira moved. The kill was instantaneous and mutual, like a rehearsed maneuver they'd never practiced. They stared at each other for half a second. That wasn't training, Brian said. No, Kira agreed softly. That was instinct. The bond hummed between them, alive, aware, unfinished. And more enemies were coming, because whatever the chamber created, it had just turned two survivors into a single threat. The transport became a kill box. Drachnids poured through ruptured walls in waves expecting wounded prey. What they found instead was coordination so tight it bordered on precognition. Brian didn't aim, he anticipated. Kira didn't dodge. She repositioned before danger existed. Her energy blade sang as it cut through chitin and armor, while his plasma rifle stitched precise death through gaps she somehow knew would open. They moved like one organism with two bodies. No wasted motion. No hesitation. This wasn't power. It was efficiency. They're adjusting, Brian said as enemy fire shifted patterns. I know, Kira replied, and he realized she wasn't answering his words. She was answering the same data he was seeing. The bond sharpened. Every kill refined it. Every near miss tightened the loop between them. Brian felt her warrior instincts, ancient, disciplined, honed through ritual and combat philosophy. She felt his, brutal pragmatism, battlefield math, the cold clarity of survival. The Drachnids began to retreat. That was new. They're afraid, Kira said, almost surprised. Brian reloaded smoothly. Good. Fear makes mistakes. They pushed forward instead of fleeing, carving a path through the wreckage toward higher ground. Smoke thinned. Signals spiked. Brian's HUD finally stabilized. Incoming transmissions, alliance frequencies, multiple sources. Kira felt it too. They're tracking the energy signature from the pod. Of course they are. Human command will want explanations, she said. Larian high matrons will want control. Brian snorted. They can get in line. They reached the edge of the battlefield as extraction craft streaked across the sky. Too many, too fast. This wasn't rescue. It was convergence. Kira slowed, fingers brushing his arm unconsciously. Brian, the bond is still deepening. He felt it. A pull, a pressure. Something unfinished threading itself tighter. Tell me later, he said. Right now we move. She nodded, but unease flickered through the shared space between them. Because bonds like this weren't meant to be temporary, and neither side was going to let them walk away unnoticed. Because survival was no longer the problem, ownership was what they made. The first Alliance shuttle landed hard, kicking ash across the ruins. Weapons powered down but not holstered. Brian noted that immediately. Kira Banis, a human officer called out. By order of Alliance Command, you are to surrender and... No, Brian said flatly. The word carried more weight than it should have. Kira felt it ripple through the bond. That was unwise. Yeah, he replied, but accurate. Larian craft descended next, sleeker, quieter. Their presence pressed against the air like judgment. A matron stepped forward, eyes locking onto Kira, and then narrowing when she sensed the bond. This union is unauthorized, the matron said coldly, and unstable. Kira straightened. It saved my life. And altered him, the matron snapped, gesturing at Brian. Humans are not meant to... Funny, Brian cut in. Could have sworn that decision was mine. Weapons raised on both sides. Brian felt Kira tense, not fear. Calculation. They want to separate us, she whispered mentally. Study the bond, replicate it. Brian's jaw tightened. Over my dead body. Something new stirred between them. Not just connection. Resolve. The ground hummed faintly beneath their feet. Systems responding to a resonance neither species fully understood yet. The bond wasn't finished evolving. And everyone here knew it, because the galaxy had just realized they weren't witnesses to a miracle. They were standing next to a precedent. The first replication attempt failed within 48 hours. A Larian research vessel attempted to recreate the bond using captured data from the battlefield. 2 volunteers, 1 chamber, perfect conditions. Both subjects died screaming. The second attempt was human. Alliance scientists stripped the ritual of its cultural context, treating it like software instead of biology. They forced synchronization through neural overrides and combat stimulants. The result was worse. 1 subject survived, technically, but lost all autonomous motor control. His nervous system locked into a permanent feedback loop, unable to distinguish his own sensations from the phantom presence of someone who wasn't there. Brian watched the footage in silence. Kira didn't. This is wrong, she said, voice tight. They copied the mechanism, not the intent. Same mistake every time, Brian muttered. They see results and skip understanding. Across the galaxy, more attempts followed. Some militaries tried pairing elite soldiers. Others tried prisoners. A few desperate factions tried unwilling subjects. None succeeded. The bond wasn't reproducible because it wasn't engineered. It was chosen, and that terrified everyone. Alliance Command issued an immediate containment directive. Lyrian matrons invoked ancient prohibitions. Both sides quietly agreed on one thing. Brian and Kira were too dangerous to remain uncontrolled. "They're coming," Kira said one night, sensing the shift before any official order arrived. Brian nodded. "Yeah, figured." "You could run," she added softly. "Disappear." He turned to her, expression steady. "Not without you." The bond pulsed, approval, certainty, something deeper. The galaxy had tried to turn a miracle into a weapon, and paid for it in blood. Because when imitation failed, fear took its place. And fear always looks for someone to blame. The official summons came from both sides. Joint tribunal, neutral station, mandatory attendance. "That's a trap," Brian said immediately. "Yes," Kira agreed. "A polite one." They went anyway. Because running would prove every accusation true. The chamber was packed with admirals, matrons, analysts, and observers pretending not to stare. Brian felt it instantly, the way the room reacted to them as a unit instead of individuals. They weren't seen as people anymore. They were a variable. "You represent an uncontrolled escalation," Admiral Hayes said. "A biological weapon neither side authorized." Kira's jaw tightened. "I am not a weapon." "No," Brian added. "You're just scared because this didn't come from a lab." The Larian matron rose slowly. "The bond violates our oldest doctrines. It bypasses ritual, hierarchy, and consent frameworks." "Funny," Brian said. "Consent was the only thing we didn't skip." Silence. Data was projected. Casualty graphs, failed replications, political instability metrics. "This bond destabilizes balance," Hayes concluded. "Therefore it must be regulated." "Or dismantled," the matron added. Brian felt the bond flare, protective, defiant. "You try to cut this," he said calmly, "and you won't like what happens next." That wasn't a threat. It was an observation. Because something inside the bond had shifted again. Subtle, controlled, permanent. They weren't stronger because they fought. They were stronger because they refused to be separated. And the galaxy finally understood that containment was no longer an option. Because when control failed, the question stopped being, "Can we stop them?" and became, "What happens if we don't?" It wasn't Brian or Kira who changed the equation. It was the bond itself. During the tribunal's deadlock, systems across the station began to behave differently. Power rerouted without commands. Defensive grids harmonized human and Larian protocols seamlessly. No override, no breach, just cooperation. Technicians panicked. Analysts froze. Brian felt it immediately. "That's not us." Kira's eyes widened. "It's adapting." The bond wasn't amplifying aggression. It was minimizing conflict. Station AI logs showed something unprecedented. Efficiency curves improving as hostility decreased. Weapon systems powered down, not disabled, but deprioritized. Med bays rerouted resources automatically. The bond wasn't a weapon. It was a system optimizer. "Impossible," Hayes whispered. "No," Kira said softly. "Inevitable." The realization hit the room like gravity. This wasn't about two individuals. This was about a model, a way forward that didn't rely on dominance or extinction. The tribunal ended without a ruling, because none was needed. You don't regulate a future. You adapt to it. As Brian and Kira left the station together, the galaxy watched, uncertain, wary, changed. And for the first time since the war began, conflict projections dropped instead of rising. Because the most dangerous thing humanity ever created wasn't a weapon, it was an example. Peace scared people more than war ever had. Within days of the tribunal, fringe factions began broadcasting denunciations. Religious coalitions called the bond heresy. Military blocs labeled it an existential imbalance. Even civilian networks split, half calling Brian and Kira symbols of hope, the other half calling them a ticking bomb. Someone leaked their location. The first assassination attempt came quietly. A courier drone entered the station under a medical clearance code and detonated 2 decks away. It wasn't meant to kill them, just test response time. Brian felt the intent before the blast even finished echoing. Kira stiffened beside him. "They're probing." Security forces rushed in, weapons raised, confused by conflicting orders. The bond flared, not violently but decisively. Doors sealed, panic flattened into coordination. The attackers were caught within minutes. Not because Brian fought, because the station worked with him. They'll keep trying, Brian said later, sitting on the edge of the bunk. Soft targets, false flags, accidents. Kira nodded. Fear doesn't need logic. What do we do? She was quiet for a long moment, then, we stop being rare. That landed harder than any threat. You want to replicate it? No, she said firmly. We teach it. Not the bond itself, but the principles behind it. Mutual consent, shared vulnerability, choice over coercion. Human scientists called it impossible. Lyrian elders called it blasphemy. But the first volunteers still stepped forward. And none of them died. Because the galaxy had spent centuries mastering control, and now had to learn cooperation from scratch. The first training enclave opened on a quiet moon with no strategic value. That didn't last. Sabotage followed within weeks. 3 instructors were killed. 2 volunteers vanished mid-rotation. Someone tried to poison the water supply with a tailored neurotoxin. Brian stood over the damage, jaw tight. They're escalating. Yes, Kira said, because it's working. Early bond-adjacent pairs weren't powerful. They weren't soldiers. But conflict rates around them dropped measurably. Negotiations lasted longer. Violence de-escalated faster. That scared the wrong people. A strike force finally came openly. 4 elite soldiers, heavily augmented. Orders to extract Brian alive and neutralize Kira permanently. The fight was brutal and short. Not because Brian was stronger. Because the soldiers hesitated. They felt the bond's influence, subtle, invasive, undeniable. Their training screamed to fire. Their instincts told them this was wrong. 2 fled. 1 surrendered. The last didn't. Afterward, Brian sat shaking, blood on his hands, breathing hard. I didn't want that. Kira knelt in front of him, steady and warm. You didn't choose it. The galaxy watched the footage anyway. And something shifted, because for the first time, violence against the bond didn't look heroic. It looked desperate. Because when killing stopped working, the old powers realized they were running out of options. Years later, history would argue about who started it. Humans would claim innovation. Lyrians would claim tradition. The truth was smaller. 1 man fed a caged alien because it felt wrong not to. 1 woman chose not to kill him for it. Everything else followed. The bond never spread fast. It didn't need to. It changed the shape of conflict instead of replacing it. Wars didn't vanish, but they stalled. Diplomacy stopped being theater. Brian aged. Kira didn't. Not in the same way, but she stayed. They were offered titles, power, immortality, research. They refused all of it. Instead, they taught. Not how to fight. How to listen without losing yourself. When Brian finally died, quietly, naturally, the bond didn't collapse. It settled. Kira mourned him fiercely, privately, completely, and then she continued. Because the bond had never been about permanence. It was about choice. And the galaxy, slow, stubborn, terrified, had finally learned it. Humanity didn't conquer the stars by force. It survived them by learning when not to.